Welcome to Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Sit back, relax. Let me tell you a story. Tonight's telling is not of one story, but several. Old Bardic threads gather together, the way fires are banked for the night. The stories are meant to wash over you, to give your mind something beautiful to rest against. This is a compilation for listening, for resting, for remembering how it feels to be held by voice. Let's get into it. The Witch of Three Shadow Moor. Long before the gods fell asleep, when the wind still spoke in full sentences and the moon bled silver in her grief, a child was born on the edge of Three Shadow Moor, a place where sky, earth, and the dead blurred together. Let's get into it. They named her Soraya. Her cry was not heard, for she was born during the silence, a strange span of 3 nights each year when no sound could cross the moor. The midwives claimed this was a curse. The old wise woman smiled and said, "No, she is simply listening to older songs." Soraya grew in a sod-covered hut carved into the bone of a hill. Her family were moss herders and bone knitters, poor but steeped in the old ways. They taught her to read raindrops like runes, to plant quartz with the onions, and to never speak her true name at dusk. By age 8, Soraya began to shine when she dreamt. Her body remained still, but her spirit walked into neighbors' homes, through locked iron gates, into the ruins buried beneath the moor. She found a mirror buried beneath the roots of a thorn tree. It reflected her, not as she was, but as 3 women, child, mother, crone, who whispered to her in unison. They named her Witch-seer, Moorborn, Sky-sighted. By adolescence, Soraya discovered her talent for weaving sigils from fog. She could bend weather with breathwork, scribe fire into water, and charm the dead into memory instead of menace. But the magic that defined her was veil walking, stepping through thin spots in the world to speak to those who lived across the veil. She used salt to close rifts, hemlock to hear truth, a knife carved from moonstone to sever ghost threads from the living. Villagers feared her, but they came when they needed help. When a child vanished, she walked the dream paths and returned with the child in her arms. When a blight struck the crops, she burned sleep thistle under the waning moon, drawing the sickness into herself, then fasting until it passed. Her greatest work was the binding spiral, a ritual etched in silver ink around the graves of the unburied, which allowed the dead to pass into peace. Before her, Three Shadow was haunted. After her, it was holy. Soraya loved once a glasswright named Theron who carved her a pendant filled with swamplight. But her work was heavy, and Theron longed for stillness. He left. She never bound another heart to hers. On her last night, Soraya knew it was time. She walked to the center of the moor, laid down her moonstone blade, and whispered 3 names. Her child name, her soul name, her shadow name. The earth opened like a sigh. Mist poured forth and enveloped her. No body was ever found. But every year, on the 3rd day of silence, the villagers leave a bowl of salt, a sprig of hemlock, and a thread of silver beside their doors. And sometimes, in their dreams, they see her walking barefoot through the fog, hand raised in quiet blessing. Her name is not spoken now, only remembered, only revered. The rebel nurse of the Citadel. In the sterile, humming corridors of the Ascendant Spire, a city that never touched the ground, Veyra Sol was born under the lights of the clean sector. Let's get into it. Her parents were biotechnicians, each chosen for their gene stability and social neutrality. From the moment she opened her eyes, she was monitored: brainwaves, breath rate, emotional balance. But Veyra was born wrong. She felt too much. As a child, she touched every surface as if it might hold memory. She cried when a service droid shut down. She laughed when the sunrise hit the sterile glass in just the right way. Her parents gently corrected her. Neutrality is health, they reminded. But Veyra began to hum to herself, low tunes that didn't match any programming code. When she was 7, she was tested for deviation. The machine returned unclear results. Her empathy couldn't be measured. It was off chart, impossible to define. They let her stay, quietly watched. Adolescence brought deeper questions. Veyra wandered into the unused lower sectors, where broken machinery lay in soft piles of dust. That's where she found the Undermurmur, a space encoded in spores and forgotten code. There she met Eden, a rogue like herself. Red hair, eyes like flint, a voice like honey and broken promises. Together they read banned scrolls and books from Lost Earth, mythology, poetry, rebellion. They kissed once beneath a leaking pipe. Neither spoke of it again. Veyra was soon elevated to Nurse Class Tech 3. She scored high in compliance but low in detachment. Her superiors warned her, do not grieve the patients. They are statistics, processes. Veyra nodded and sang lullabies to them in secret. Then came Nari, a boy of 8 with storm patterns in his blood and dreams that overlapped reality. They said he was unstable, that he needed full neural erasure. But when Veyra placed her hand over his heart, the machines calmed. She knew then she would not let them erase him. Over weeks, she rewrote her own biosignature, encoded Nari's identity into hers. She smuggled him through maintenance shaft and past roving drones. They reached the outer edge just as the alarms rang. She turned to him and whispered, "Run, until the air feels soft." He did. He survived. They caught her. Veyra Sol was unpersoned, deleted from records, her access revoked. She became a ghost in the system. Her body was found months later in the lower vent tunnels, wrapped in her nurse's coat, a recording loop humming a lullaby. Years passed. Nari became a cultural leader of the new city of air. At every dawn ceremony, he played her song. A city that had outlawed emotion now rose each day with her voice in its heart. Veyra's rebellion was not loud, but it was enough to change everything. Noah, the boy with the garden soul. Let's get into it. He was born with dirt under his fingernails and sunlight in his bones. From the first day he could walk, Noah found his way to the earth, planting seeds, touching bark, whispering to tomatoes as if they might whisper back. He grew up on a gentle homestead, tucked in a fertile valley surrounded by wildflower meadows, glacial rivers, and misty blue hills. His parents, May and Corwin, ran the land with kindness rather than control. They didn't till, they listened. They didn't poison, they partnered. Noah was their son, but he was also the garden's child. The animals adored him. A stubborn goat named Pip followed him everywhere, and the bees never stung him, not even once. By the time he was 10, his herbs were stronger than any in the village. People came from all over to ask what to grow, how to speak to the soil, not because he was a prodigy, but because he was present. Every root, every leaf, every touch mattered to him. He never moved away. He never chased gold or titles. He stayed in that valley on that land, building a world that fed people, welcomed orphans, and healed the grieving. He married a girl named Clara who wore feathers in her braids and sang to the moon. They had 4 children, all raised barefoot and bright-eyed, each one learning how to ask the trees before taking a branch. Noah died old, with his head resting on Clara's lap, under the willow he had planted as a boy. His hands smelled like mint. He had never stopped tending the world, and the world, in turn, had never stopped blooming around him. He lived a life of pure magic, the kind that doesn't need spells or stars, just time, love, and roots. Lesson. Magic can be quiet. It doesn't have to roar to be real. The most sacred power is stewardship. Aravelle's Requiem, the Symphony of Soul. Aravelle was born in a quiet hamlet where music held more memory than ink, where songs were passed mouth to mouth like sacred wine, and every child's first lullaby was an inheritance. Let's get into it. Aravelle's voice was different. She didn't hum, she healed. At 2 years old, she sang her grandmother out of death's reach. At 4, her melody calmed a fevered wolf enough to lie at her feet. By 7, the strings of a harp would tune themselves before she could touch them. It wasn't taught, it was remembered. By 13, her voice could part fog and guide ships to the shore. Lords summoned her, crowds gathered. But the more she sang for others, the more her voice dulled. Until one evening upon the grandest stage in Tristane, her voice failed entirely. A single note, half formed, then silence. They called it punishment for pride. She called it loss. She retreated into solitude, to a moss-covered abbey once used by the Order of the Silent Muse. There she studied how sound carved memory into wood, how stones sang when wet with rain, how silence shaped music as much as any note. She learned to listen. And then one dusk, as light slipped like silk across the river, she picked up a bowed lyra, carved from ash and bone. She did not play to be heard, she played to remember. And the moment her bow kissed string, the forest answered. Birds halted their cries, wind bent to the rhythm, and from the stones, echoes rose. Souls that had been waiting, tethered to memories only music could recall. She became more than a bard, she became a weaver. Where she played, the past clarified. Lost children found their way home. Hidden truths surfaced. Broken hearts wept and healed. Her songs didn't merely echo. They unlocked layers of grief, joy, and deep soul knowing. All of it lay dormant in her audience until she drew it forward with sound. Aravelle never chased fame again. Instead, she wandered barefoot across forgotten lands, her lyra slung across her back like a second spine. She performed only when called, not by people, but by need. And when she died, softly, beneath a silver birch with the final notes still quivering on her lips, a wild bloom of unknown flowers covered her grave, and a song only animals could hear hung in the air for 7 days and nights. To this day, her lyra remains untouched in the abbey, strung with threads of moonlight, waiting for the next soul who can remember how to listen beyond the veil of sound, because music, at its root, is not performance, it is remembrance. Isolde's Archive, the Codex of Flame. Before ink was sacred, before parchment bore the weight of spell or scripture, there were those who carried knowledge in blood. Isolde was one. Let's get into it. She was born under a bleeding comet, the only child of the last librarian of Seer Telion, a tower hidden in fog and carved from volcanic glass. The library, they said, held not books but memories, alive, whispering, shifting. The rooms that reconfigured based on the seeker's question. Tomes that refused to open unless your soul echoed the right vibration. Isolde could read by the age of 3, not words but meaning. She'd trail her fingers along spines of ancient tomes and weep, not from confusion, but recognition. Her mother said she was remembering lifetimes of learning sealed in her bones. But before she could come of age, the fire came. A fraction of power-hungry nobles who feared the depth of the archives stormed the tower. They didn't seek to read. They sought to erase. They set fire to the stone itself. It should have been impossible. And yet, Sayer Telion burned. Isolde barely escaped, clutching a single fragment of the Codex of Flame, an ancient artifact said to carry not spells, but the soul of fire itself, living memory and light. Her mother, the last librarian, vanished into the ash. Alone and hunted, Isolde wandered. The fragment spoke to her, not in language, but through dreams. It showed her doors beneath mountains, vaults beneath lakes, and ruins overgrown in ivy that hid pages woven into roots. She began to gather. She became the silent reclaimer, disguised, unseen, moving like wind. She restored what could be remembered. In inns and abbeys, she left folded notes in hidden seams, pages of truth. In night markets, she whispered riddles that opened minds. In temples, she lit candles that burned blue, a sign to those who still remembered. Those who followed her path began to awaken. One by one, the flame-born emerged, keepers of memory, dreamers who had forgotten they once carried vast knowledge in their marrow. They did not fight with swords or fire, but with memory and melody and meaning. Isolde never rebuilt the tower. She became one, a living archive, every scar a sigil, every breath a scroll. When she died, her body turned to glass, and the fragment placed on her heart sank into her chest and lit once more. Now when the flame flickers in odd rhythm, or when a book opens without being touched, some say it's Isolde, searching for another who remembers not with mind but soul, because knowledge is never truly lost. It only waits to be called home. Nayra's earth, the Geomancer's vein. The Andes were her cradle. Let's get into it. Long before she could speak, Nayra would crawl to the carved stones that flanked her grandmother's garden. She'd rest her hands against their faces and fall silent, not in confusion, but in communion. Her eyes never blinked in that stillness. She was listening. The villagers said she was a mountain soul reborn, a child touched by Inti, the sun spirit. But Nayra paid them no mind. She was more concerned with the pulse she felt under her feet whenever she walked the old paths, a gentle thrum, like a memory wrapped in root and stone. At 15, everything changed. While tending the ceremonial altar at dawn, she placed her hand upon the sacred huaca and collapsed. Visions flooded her, maps of glowing veins beneath the earth, lines of power coursing between mountains, ancient altars awakening with song. She didn't tell anyone. The world was not ready for what she'd seen. But that night, the condors circled her home without sound, and her dreams carried her to the ancient keepers, the last solar priests, not men, not women, presence. They welcomed her as kin. They taught her how to walk the ley with bare feet and silent breath, to trace sun lines with stone and shadow, to hum low and slow, to still a tremor before it rose. She learned that the earth was not sleeping. It was waiting for those who remembered how to sing into it. As she grew older, she left no trail of fame or fear. She moved among people quietly, blessing land beneath market stalls, coaxing forgotten springs back to life with whispers. And those who doubted her often found their illnesses gone, their animals calmed, their fields richer after a single meeting. Nayra aged slowly. Earthbound magic has a way of anchoring time. When she passed, it was said her body vanished into stone, her final breath curling into the wind like incense. Now, when the solstice light crosses certain temples just right, it lingers, glowing longer than science allows, because Nayra still walks, not in body, but in vein. And if you press your ear to the mountain skin and breathe, really breathe, you might hear her footsteps moving just beneath. Threadwalker, the Mirror Realms. She had always felt the edges of things. Let's get into it. Even as a child in the quiet stone town of Ainsley, Celine Veyra knew the air sometimes shimmered just before a person spoke, that certain doors felt too heavy or too awake to open, that sometimes her reflection blinked just a half a moment late. Celine never told anyone, not when the books rearranged themselves on her shelves, not when she walked to school and ended up on an unfamiliar lane that shouldn't exist, and not when, at 15, she stood in her grandmother's hallway mirror and saw herself, older, braver, holding hands with a man she had never met. Time twisted gently around her like water around ankles. It wasn't until her 27th year, the winter her father passed and she returned to his cottage in grief, that everything unraveled. The mirror in the hallway cracked, not from impact, but from invitation. She touched it. The world shifted, not violently, softly, like breath becoming fog. On the other side, a room almost the same but dustier, her coat different, her heart racing. And standing across from her was Thalen, quiet-eyed, familiar, a threadwalker like her. He didn't speak of love, he spoke of paths, choices, loops. He taught her how time was not a line but a loom, how each choice weaves a new world, that she had crossed threads not by chance, but because her soul was fraying in one reality and remembered peace in another. They walked together between versions, through temples made of thought, forests that held 1,000 memories of the same tree, deserts where grief echoed as color. Celine learned to mend what was broken in timelines by shifting perspectives in hearts. She became a seamstress of potential, but she could not stay. One world, hers, needed her presence, her healing, her understanding of how to guide others without ever revealing the thread beneath their feet. She returned home to the mirror. This time she sealed it, not to sever, but to respect. And though she never married, never told anyone of Thalen, she felt him sometimes in dreams, a silver glint on the edge of consciousness, a warmth where there should be loss. Celine became a healer, not of bodies, but of possibilities. She taught quietly, spoke softly, and left behind a mirror in every home she visited, not for vanity, but for those ready to find their thread, because some reflections are not echo, but invitation. The Firewalk of Matthew. Matthew was not born of fire, but fire lived in him. Let's get into it. His village, nestled on the edge of the ardent wastes, was carved into cliffs that glowed red during sunrise. The land was not forgiving. Rain rarely visited, and when it did, it arrived like a storm of fists, cracking open the earth, flooding the dry rivers, then disappearing again as if embarrassed. Yet people survived here. They were tough-skinned, long-shadowed, and always barefoot, walking on scorched sand as if it were silk. Matthew came into the world under unusual signs, a dry lightning strike that split the village altar the night his mother went into labor, a fox that sat outside their door and would not leave until he took his first breath. The elders whispered that the boy would bring change. His mother whispered that he would bring truth. From his earliest days, Matthew seemed to resist stillness. He couldn't sit through ceremonies. He wouldn't eat unless fed under the open sky. When he walked through the desert with his father, a stone carver, he always strayed from the path. He collected heat-warped bones, carved messages into them with a shard of black glass he refused to part with. These bones he buried in spirals around the base of his family's hut. At 8, Matthew burned his palm touching a ritual flame he was warned not to approach. But instead of crying out, he stared into it for a long time. When asked later what he saw, he answered, "My name, walking." He was sent to the Flame Keepers, a semi-nomadic order of spiritual firewalkers who trained in the distant Ember Range. Most never returned, but Matthew thrived. He did not fear pain, he feared dishonesty. He was quick to call out lies, especially those cloaked in polite tradition. He earned enemies among the older keepers, but loyalty from the fire itself. At 17, he underwent the trial of still ash. For 3 days, he was buried neck deep in warm ash under a full sun, without water. On the 3rd night, he began to sing, not from his mouth, but from beneath the earth. The ash vibrated around him, and when they dug him out, he emerged standing, not crawling. Matthew became a traveling flame speaker, called to walk barefoot across the fire at sacred sites during drought, grief, or war. His feet never blistered. Villagers would gather in silence as he crossed coals, his eyes closed, whispering stories into the sparks that leapt from his heels. Each fire walk was a ritual. He'd place bones from his childhood pouch in a circle before the fire, whisper their names, then begin. If the fire responded, which it always did for him, it curled upward in spiral bursts like flame breathing. Matthew never took students. He believed each firewalker was born, not trained. His life was filled with movement, sacred solitude, and rare but profound conversations. His companion was a desert hound named Oscar, blind in one eye, who never left his side. They would sleep beside the fire pits, wrapped in each other's warmth and the whisper of embers. Matthew passed during a long drought. He walked the coals one final time, not across, but into the fire. Witnesses said he did not burn, he vanished. Not consumed, but integrated. The flames that day turned green and blue and didn't go out for 3 days. The villagers renamed the fire plane in his honor, Matthew's Echo. To this day, when the wind rushes across the ash beds at dusk, it sometimes carries a footstep sound, soft and bare and steady. The wind in Lyanda's wake. She was born to the mist. Let's get into it. Lyanda's first breath came just before dawn, when fog wove itself between the roots of pine trees, and the sky held the color of silver and lavender. Her village sat cradled in the arms of a great forest, a northern stretch where wind spoke louder than people, and clouds drifted low enough to touch. From the moment her mother swaddled her, Lyanda was described as quiet, not silent, but tuned to a different frequency, listening more than speaking, attuned to the rustle of branch and breath. Her hair was the pale color of drifted snow, and her eyes held a deep mossy hue that never quite looked straight ahead. She seemed to be watching time itself from the corners of her sight. She spent her early years wandering the perimeters of the hollowed forest paths, accompanied by an old shepherd dog named Jesse. He was not hers, but he followed her loyally, curling around her at night when she slept in the roots of old trees, and barking at shadows she couldn't yet name. The village children said she could talk to birds. In truth, Lyanda didn't speak to animals, she heard them. She could sense a squirrel's warning cry and know the hawk was near, could feel the silence of a pond before a storm. Her teachers tried to bring her indoors, but she'd escape through cracks and creeks and return only when the moon rose. One winter, A boy drowned in the river. Lyanda said she heard the ice crack long before it gave. She warned the wind, but not the people. That day she stopped speaking altogether, for nearly 3 years. By 15, she had built a sanctuary from branches and moss behind a waterfall. It was her observatory, her temple, her cave. There she read the sky and grew herbs taught to her by an elder named Gale, who walked with a bent cane and smelled like smoke and pine tar. Gale passed on the lore of seed cycles, root sings, and how to identify a sick tree by the taste of its sap. In those years, Lyanda began to draw the winds. She kept charcoal sketches of air patterns, tiny loops, spirals, and streaming lines that described not the shape of things, but their movements. Sometimes, villagers would wake to find patterns carved into their snow-drifted fields. They thought they were from spirits. Lyanda never said otherwise. Her magic was not of fire or illusion, but of motion. Subtle shifts, gentle redirection, a breath in the right moment. When the great drought hit, a neighboring province sent riders demanding the village's fresh water source. There would be war. Lyanda, then 22, left without telling anyone. She followed the ley lines marked on her old drawings, crossing ravines and climbing wind-choked cliffs to reach the high ridges above the storm veil. There she found the sky chantresses, women who learned the old art of wind dancing, moving their bodies in sequences that altered airflow, dispersing clouds or summoning vapor. Lyanda trained for 2 years under the tutelage of a woman named Faithia, who spoke only in riddles and whistles. Lyanda learned to shift mists with her breath and send messages riding on air currents. When she returned, she stood barefoot in the village center and sang the wind. The pressure shifted, clouds gathered. Rain fell that night for the first time in 8 months. She never asked for thanks. Lyanda lived alone, but not lonely. She taught what she could, but few had the patience to hear the wind. Children visited her for her stories. Animals came to her hollow to pass away in peace. She buried each with a strand of her hair. One night, in her early 40s, Lyanda walked into the woods after hearing a new kind of wind, one she didn't recognize. She left her satchel behind. Only Jessie, long since reborn into a gray-eyed pup, followed her. They never found her body, only spiral patterns of moss pressed deep into the clearing floor where she had once danced. Some say she became part of the wind. Others say she was always made of it. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining me for Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Don't forget to subscribe, share, follow, and like, and I'll catch you next time.